three things that I want to talk about today. First and foremost, it's not innovation that people are looking for, it's growth. Growth is the only strategic imperative of a business, of anything that we do. It's growth. We need to grow, because if we are not growing, we're perhaps dying. And if we are not focusing on growth, then we get in trouble. Innovation is a how to drive the growth.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Emil Anderson and I'm a manager for our B2B thought leadership at Project Management Institute. Today's topic is From Management to Leadership, Actionable Strategies for Innovative Leadership. So we're exploring a theme that we've touched upon earlier this year, and we're seeing that a lot of people and followers of us here at Brightline PMI are interested in this, and that's innovation. So in this session, we'll delve into the trends that are disrupting entire industries and discuss how forward-thinking leaders, executives, strategies can anticipate what's coming next. We'll also explore the critical role of chief innovation officers and how they're playing in building teams that drive these innovations forward. By the end of this session, you'll be equipped, hopefully, with actionable strategies, not only to imagine the future, but also to make it real and then creating value that's sustainable, meaningful, and impactful for you yourself, and then also for your own organization. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker because we're lucky, but we're joined by an innovation guru and a friend of PMI, Hitendra Patel, who is the founder and managing director at Global Innovation Management Institute, or GIMI, which is the largest certifying institution on innovation. At GIMI, Hitendra has been driving the creation of innovation standards and certifications to establish innovation as a management discipline. He's also the creator of the Accelerator, designed to help practitioners and subject matter experts to achieve 10x growth. In addition to that, Hitendra also leads the IXL Center, which is a global innovation consulting firm in the US, where he has driven innovation transformation initiatives at major corporations. He's also a senior leader at Monitor Group and Arthur D. Little's innovation practice. Hitendra started his career as a technologist at Motorola and has founded multiple venture-backed companies. He's a globally recognized innovation thought leader, delivering keynotes at international conferences and advising Fortune 1000 companies. He's also built the world's largest startup accelerator through Halt Price in collaboration with none less than President Bill Clinton and his team. And lastly, Hitendra holds an MBA at Kellogg School of Management and a PhD in material science and engineering at Iowa State. So with that, I'll stop talking here. I'm thrilled to hand over the stage to our keynote, Hitendra. Over to you.
So first of all, thank you very much for having me in this panel and this presentation. What an amazing audience from all over the world. I'm very excited to talk to all of you and talk about innovation, especially my favorite topic. So today, what I wanted to talk about is management to leadership and actionable strategies for innovation leadership itself. And many of you are in the PMI community are excellent project managers and know how to manage the present, know how to do things on time and on budget. And you guys are fantastic in getting things started and finishing what you start. There is a difference and in terms of innovation management. Innovation management is actually talking about uncertainty, ambiguity. It is talking about unclear end state. It's about not having the processes or methodologies today to be able to solve the problems, and therefore you have to experiment and iterate. And in that is the definition of leadership. Leaders are able to see the future and create it. They're able to imagine it and sell it to other people. and they're able to put teams together to make it real. That's what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, that introduction was quite flattering, but in summary, yep, written quite a few books. I've been teaching at various business schools. I've been a management consultant at some of the top consulting firms, working with some of the biggest companies. That's where I learned a lot of what not to do as much as what to do. And also have done this by rolling up my sleeves and putting into practice the way to make it real by having startups, businesses that have been sold, venture capital finance and other things together. So that's what I'm going to try and share with you, and some best practices as you guys take your journey from management into leadership. And some of you are already leaders, and how to be better leaders. 3 things that I want to talk about today. First and foremost, it's not innovation that people are looking for, it's growth. Growth is the only strategic imperative of a business, of anything that we do. It's growth. We need to grow, because if we are not growing, we're perhaps dying. And if we are not focusing on growth, then we get in trouble. Innovation is a how to drive the growth. In order to make innovation important in your organization, therefore, you've got to link it strategically to growth. We'll talk about that. The second is you will have to think differently. The way you have been thinking, the way you have been acting has been based on what people have been saying is the right thing to do. Manage facts, manage data, and execute only what you can manage. Well, in innovation, we're going to turn that completely upside down. We have to try and manage ambiguity, uncertainty. We got to be able to see the future. We got to be able to put teams to work on that, keep them excited about making sure we finish what we start. And therefore, even the project management tools that you use are different. You'll have to act differently. I'm going to talk about those 3 things, and hopefully in here, you'll be able to say, which are the strengths that you have, where are your weaknesses, and why should I focus? So let's begin. Growth. This is essentially what it's all about. If you really look at any business, there is this thing at the bottom which says, what is my current growth? And if you look at a business, the growth will continue, but at some point it starts flattening out. It will flatten out. It flattens out because whatever you did yesterday, you cannot continue doing today. And therefore, as a result, in the future, competition catches up, the customers change, and whatever gave you the growth begins to get flat and less. But the reality is there's a red line called expectation. There's expectation from your shareholders, expectation from your businesses that you must continue growing. And over time, if you ask any CEO right now, any of your leaders, do you have a growth gap? Number 1, do you have a growth gap? The question always is yes. Every business has a growth gap. Because if you ask, what is the expectation? The expectation is the red line. If you ask the management team today, can you deliver that result today? They'll say probably not. If you ask them, what can you deliver? It might be the black line over here. That gap is ultimately the strategic reason for innovation itself. Okay. Number 2, you have to ask yourself, how much time do we have to close the gap? If the time is a lot, then you might say, let's not worry about it. But if the time is short, now the urgency begins. And then ultimately, if the gap is big, the time is relatively short, then you've got to ask how much will we invest to make it happen. This is what we call $1 million slide. The $1 million slide, which basically sets expectations of leadership. Why we need to innovate. There is a growth gap. We don't know how to close that growth gap. So we need new ideas, new solutions to solve the problem. And similarly, the time tells you how little time we have to make that happen. So this is true for every company across the globe. This is true for every government. This is true for every nonprofit. This is true for every organization out there. You have to close the growth gap. You have a certain amount of time. But if you don't quantify it, then there is no understanding of how important this is. If you don't quantify the time, there's no understanding of how urgent this is. It's these 2 things together that creates what we call the case for change. Why companies need to innovate. It's a business reason. Once you see that, then you will need to plant some seeds. Those seeds are ideas. Ideas for what might eventually close the growth gap. Those seeds will eventually grow into little saps and little plants, into a little tree eventually, and hopefully bear fruits. It's very simple. You have a growth gap. You need to close the growth gap with new ideas. And the question is, we need to plant seeds. So now, if this is so obvious, the question is, why don't people do this? Why don't people plant the seeds for that future gap that's going to happen? Seeds are ideas. And the real problem is, what if you plant apple seeds and the market in the future wants oranges? What if what you plant today is the wrong thing for tomorrow? And therein lies the first challenge of innovation. In order for you to innovate, you have to be able to see the future. You have to be able to see what the market wants in the future, what the competition will do in the future, what technologies will be available in the future. And therefore, whatever you choose today, you're guessing on a world that hasn't even unfolded yet. And as a result, most people will not invest. Most people will say, I don't know if I should start doing this. So now, the question for all of you is this. What if you don't plant a seed? What's going to happen over here in the future? You won't have a tree or a plant, and you might be right. And if you're right, your gap will close. But if you don't plant the seed at all, then you have no chance of actually closing the gap. So what choice do you have? You have to plant seeds. If you plant a seed, you might be right. If you don't plant a seed, the future is not bright. Now, there is a good possibility that as you get into the future, the seeds that you planted might be wrong. And you begin to see that with market information, market indication, and other things. You might see that. So you might say, hey, hang on a second. I planted the wrong seeds. Maybe I should course correct. And yes, you can do that. You can always buy a tree. You can always buy a tree. But how much does a tree cost? A tree is the same as OpenAI. Microsoft got access to OpenAI's for $10 billion. Meanwhile, Google basically built their own team internally and probably spent less than probably $1 billion. A seed is Gemini. OpenAI is a tree. Gemini in Google is an internally developed idea that is beginning to be quite powerful and successful. Meanwhile, Microsoft wrote a check of $10 billion, and they're going to have a good future also. But they spent $10 billion versus maybe $1 billion. Seeds are cheaper. Seeds are ideas. Ideas are organic, and you can grow them faster. A tree is expensive. So this is our challenge. Your challenge is, how do you know what seeds to plant today for the future? So let me ask, how many of you can see the future? How many of you have a grandmother, a crystal ball, to be able to see what's next or what else? And so we need to begin to build capability and competence in our heads on how to be able to imagine and see the future. Because those who imagine and see the future are the ones who can actually create the future. We'll talk about that in the next section. The second part of this thing is, as you ask the seeds for imagining the future, do you have the patience and persistence? Innovation is not easy. It's like farming. When you plant a seed, you got to water the seeds almost every day. If you forget to water them, 1 or 2 days even, guess what happens to those plants? They die. And ideas are just the same, exactly the same. They die. So, like a farmer, you have to go walk on the farm. You got to look at the seeds. You got to walk to make sure there's water, there's pesticides, herbicides, whatever's necessary to give this plant a chance to survive. Ideas and project teams are the same. If leaders do not give them attention, if leaders do not give them love, those teams will then stop working on things and they too will give up. You have to think like a farmer. You are basically building things. Most people who are managers are harvesters. They're harvesting things that's already been built. What you have to do is actually create these things and then make sure these creations can be harvested sometime in the future. In the early stages of innovation, you have to give love, you got to give attention, you got to be patient, and you got to be persistent. And then hopefully the harvest is big enough. So therein lies the whole explanation for a business or a corporation about why we need to innovate. There's a growth gap. How important and how fast do you have to do it? It's a time and urgency. You have a limited amount of time to close that gap. Therefore, you've got to plant seeds. To plant seeds, you have to be able to imagine the future. If you can't imagine the future, then you can't plant seeds. But if you don't plant seeds, your future is not bright. If you got a lot of money, you might be able to buy a tree. Microsoft does that. But trees are expensive. That's acquisition, right? And then if you do plant seeds, then you need to act like a farmer. You gotta be patient, you gotta be persistent, you gotta give love, you gotta give attention. And if you do it right, those seeds will bear amazing fruits in the future. That's the strategic view of innovation. So now you got to think differently. You got to think differently. In order to close that gap, you need ideas. So you got to ask which seeds to plant. And the way to ask what seeds is to ask what's next and what else. What's next and what else? Each one of you, in the morning, as you wake up and maybe you shave or you put your makeup on, I want you to look in the mirror and ask the question, what's next? What else? What's next? What else? And after you do that, while you're having your coffee, with the first person you meet, ask them, hey, what's next? What else? When you're driving with the Uber driver, ask him or her, what's next? What else? When you talk to your colleagues, ask what's next? What else? When you ask what's next and what else, ideas will start coming. People will share what they think is next and what else. And in that, you begin to get a lot of dots in your head, a lot of ideas. And ultimately, from there, you bring it together into what you might be identifying your next growth area. The growth area to close the gap. So when you ask what's next, what else? We have a technology platform that looks at all the future trends of the world, whether it's the aging population or the United States or Latin America, or whether it's multiculturalism, or whether it's autonomous vehicles or AI in design. And there are more trends. The digital printing, green hydrogen, globalization, e-commerce, climate change, and even more trends out there. Green chemistry, biodegradable plastics, sustainable layer leather, and the list goes on. And all those things are what's next and what else. And those are the huge opportunities of the future that your company could participate in and do really well. But if you can't see the future, then you need to use trends. And the trends in combination allows you to see what your company might be able to do next. Let me give you an example. What's next, right? Well, we know we are a global society. Today, all of you, whether you're in Nigeria or you're in Colombia or you're in South Africa or you're in Brazil or the US or in Switzerland, you guys are all exactly the same. And you might say, how dare you say that? Well, the reality is you probably use one of three phones, an Apple, maybe something from Samsung or somewhere else. You probably have seen the same Netflix shows together. You probably have eaten at similar types of branded restaurants, and our clothes and how we dress and everything else is beginning to become increasingly similar, including the sneakers you wear, whether they're Nikes or Ons or whatever. We're more similar than different. Globalization is here. In the global world, your solutions in your country can be taken anywhere, because of that trend. What's next? Similarly, we should talk about the millennials are coming. The millennials are coming. Millennials move over. Many of you in the audience are millennials. We are not talking about you as much anymore. It's the Gen Zs are coming. The Gen Zs are coming. And this is a totally digital society. They actually saw COVID and they like to work remotely. They like to use the phones and everything else, and they imagine things in their own different ways. Similarly, that silver economy is coming. The silver economy is fascinating. The baby boomers. The baby boomers were supposed to die at 80. That was our life expectancy. Now with healthcare innovations, physical fitness, better food, the baby boomers are going to live from 80 to 100. A whole new demographic is beginning to exist that we have not even imagined: food, housing, cars, entertainment, travel, for a whole bunch of people who refuse to die, who are supposed to die historically, but we're going to add another 20 years in our market of what we're going to do. And then for some of you in the United States, welcome to the United States of Latin America. We're about to see Hispanic America become more and more part of the United States. And then also at the same time, a center of gravity moving, where the top 4 countries in the world will be in Asia, where number 1 and 2 will be the US and China, and India, Japan, Indonesia, and then other countries from Europe joining that list. But the gravity is changing. If this is what's next, you can start imagining ideas of what your company might want to do, what products you might want to do differently than last year. Then you can also ask, what's next? What else in technologies? And there we got climate change and renewables, reusables, circular economies. You might want to look at connectivate, where everything is connected: computers, sensors, big data, and all that which comes with that. Or robotics is coming. Every inconvenient thing that you've ever imagined is going to be displaced forever. And ultimately, of course, health technology. As we look at robotics in our body and outside our body, we look at CRISPR for our health extension. We look at the end of cancer, the end of many things. It's coming. And all of those things creates for you opportunities. And then we got smacked across the head recently by AI. AI completely transformed everything. And so even our thinking is also going to be powered by machines. So many companies, what they do is they try and imagine the future of their company, whether it's Alibaba who thinks of hotels of the future, or whether it's some Siemens thinking about healthcare of the future, and they all imagine the future. And in that future world, they say, who are the future customers, what future technologies, what future solutions, and they come up with solutions. And they say, we like that one and we don't like that one. They choose the future that they desire and they make it. They don't wait for the future to come to them. They imagine the future and they make the future real. In my experience in Motorola, that's what we did. We made cell phones before they existed. We made flat screen TVs before they existed. We made RFIDs for doors to open and close before they existed. We were imagining the future and we were creating the future for you. That's what innovation is. Once you do that, you got all these ideas of what you want to do. You have projects that you have to build. These projects are conceptualized first. You don't have to start the projects immediately. You conceptualize them, visualize them, and say, look, there's some projects we can just do it. This is for a beauty care company and skincare company. We can use some toning devices on the short term. We can use some sort of IT type of solutions as a coach. But as we go into the incremental pipeline, we got to start thinking about 3D printing. We got to think about nano ingredients, which is coming next. And then ultimately the breakline products will be skincare products that are based on nutraceuticals, vitamins, things that you put inside your body. And certainly beauty comes from the inside out instead of us painting our faces and other things. And then you create a portfolio of projects that you want to do. And that's the strategy. You have to make sure innovation is linked to your business growth. You got to come up and understand how big that gap is. Based on that gap, you basically come up with what the portfolio projects are required. You imagine those portfolio projects based on trends of the future. And then you got to execute them. And in execution, you have to act differently, act very differently. This is not project management where you know how to do something. There is no recipe that somebody else has done this before. So let me ask you a question. If I were to ask you, what does the project look like for innovation? If you were in charge of it and you say, you need to make the next generation of a product that's an AI coach for your products and services, how will the journey look? Now, if you ask your CEO, the CEO will say, that's easy peasy, just do it. And they'll say it's a straight line. I don't understand why it's so hard, just do it. But you guys in project management have said, no, there's a better way to just say, just go do it. It's not going to look like that. The real way to do it is perhaps more like this. We'll manage it with Gantt charts, work planning, deliverables, and step function it all the way to the end. Unfortunately, if you were to use those tools, you will fail. The real journey of innovation, of doing something that's never been done before, looks more like this. It's a journey of exploration, a journey of experimentation. Let me bring this thing down to ground so you can feel it and you understand it. Imagine you've been asked to cross the Amazon forest, but it is the 18th century. Queen Isabella from Spain has said, you need to cross the Amazon. If you cross the Amazon, it's a shortcut. So we don't have to go from South America on the east side of South America down to the west side. We can just cross right through the Amazon forest from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So 4 people make a team, and they stand in front of this green forest. They look at each other and say, do we have everything? And they say, yeah, I got my gun. Somebody says, I got my ropes. I got the tent. I've got some medicine. Great, let's go. You walk in, and the first thing you see is a big river. Do you cross the river right across it? Of course not. You go upstream the river to see whether there's a narrow point. And then you cross over. And then you start walking, and you see a series of mountains. You're like, oh my God, a lot of mountains. Do you go straight across the mountains? Of course not. You go around the first one. You take a left turn. And as you get to the other side of that mountain, you see another mountain. It's even bigger. Oh my God. You go around the second mountain. There's a third mountain behind that. Who knew that mountain was there? You didn't have a GPS. You didn't have a map. But if you didn't make the decision of saying, should I go left or right, you'd be stuck. So you make a decision. That's called experiment. And you go over there and you find out it doesn't work. So then you say, okay, let's come back again. And then you might go on the right-hand side. It might work for you. And then you might see a ravine. You don't go straight down a ravine. You go around the ravine. And eventually you cross the ravine. And then you see some really, really angry tribes. They don't like you. Whoops, U-turn. And then you go back around them, and then you might see some disease. One of your teammates gets sick, and you don't have the medicine for it. Malaria. Who knew those little pesky mosquitoes would slow you down? But if you are patient, if you're persistent, you keep the goal in mind, and you don't stop, you'll get to the other side. And that's called the journey of exploration. Nobody is with you to really tell you what to do and how to do it. You have to figure things out. Every decision you have to make, and you only learn by doing, not by pontificating and sitting in a conference room discussing. It's good to discuss, but then you have to do. Now, if a second team were to come along, and the second team were to come at this point on the left journey, because of discussions with the first team, they'll say, don't go left over here. When you see this big rock, go right. And you'll take the journey, and again, you'll have little guidance, and the second team's journey looks a little bit more of a straighter line. And eventually, a road will be built perfectly for not to make wrong choices. It's called the journey of exploration. And that's what we need to put into the project management, is how do you put in flexibility and all that. And those things have been discussed very well. But first, let's just remind you what kind of people you'll need on that team. You have to climb Mount Everest. You have to go through something that's never been done before. You need people who have got grit, people who can do, people who collaborate, and people who actually experiment. And in there, they need to use tools, different types of project management tools that gets you across these things. And this is about agile, sprint, pivot, and artifacts. And you guys have heard all those different techniques. So you got to embrace that in the execution of the idea. What are the projects we have to do? The projects we are working on must close the growth gap. And we've chosen them based on trends. Those projects, in order to execute them, nobody on your team probably has ever done a project like that, because it's a new project, but new things. And therefore, you don't have the competencies, sometimes not the capabilities, and sometimes not the methodologies. So you got to create all of them. And as a result of it, you need your best team to do that. So from now on, let me just make sure, guys, when you're asked to build a team for innovation, you go to your boss. You say, boss, I've got this great idea. And the boss says, I like it. What do you need? And you say, I need a team, 2 or 3 people. And the boss looks around. Says, okay, there's Peter over there. And there's Jane. You can have Peter and Jane. Do you know why Peter and Jane are available? And therein lies the problem. We usually find people are available to get on those teams, not the right people for climbing Mount Everest, not the right people for crossing the Amazon forest, not the right people, because these journeys are harder because there is no real knowledge around you. So how do you shortcut that? And what you see in many organizations now, what we call accelerators, and those accelerators have a process with agile sprints and experimental techniques built into the process and methodology. They provide coaches and mentors, others who have done similar types of experiments and projects, not the same ones, but similar, so they can provide some sort of coaching saying, do this first, do this second, you've done too much of that. And then ultimately, you put the right people and teams together. And if you have those, now you have a higher likelihood to succeed. If you look at the explorers who explored Amazon, or Lewis and Clark, or David Livingstone in Africa, all of those guys, they always had a coach and a mentor. They were usually the local people. They had a process for what they were going to do, check-in points, experiment, and they wouldn't give up. And they also tried to build the best teams to do what they had to do. And that's the recipe for increasing your probability in working in projects which are ambiguous and uncertain. Second thing that is really critical is a discipline. And we learned this from the Koreans. We work with most of these companies, and the Korean CEOs would always tell us, how long will it take? And we'll tell them it'll take 2 years to build a flat panel factory. It'll take you 1.5 years to build a lithium-ion battery plant. And every time I work with any of the CEOs in Korea, they would go like this to me. They go, and they made this sound. They made this sound in the back of their mouth, which meant that they were not happy. And they said, can you do it faster? So I said, what do you mean? He says, Pali Pali. I'm like, what the hell is Pali Pali? And they said, Pali Pali. And they smack their hands together and say, Pali Pali. For those who are Koreans, you know what that means. It means fast, fast. Fast, fast. And they realized the basis of competition was speed. And you had to keep people moving with Pali Pali. And so they created urgency. And urgency is saying, hey, we got competition from Samsung if you're LG. If you're Samsung, we got competition from Sony and Sanyo. If you're Hyundai, we got competition from Toyota. And they basically said, we got to go fast, fast. And they would check in and they create urgency of speed. Because innovation isn't about going slow. Innovation is about going as fast as you can against your competition. And they recreate this mindset, urgency, Pali Pali. And everywhere around the world where I go, if you hear me, I tell my teams, guys, Pali Pali. Let's go, Pali Pali. You got to go faster. And the last part of this Pali Pali part that is so important, ultimately, is because you're doing something that you've never done before. Innovation is new. Some of the competencies don't exist in your company. Don't go at it alone. Because if you try and go at it alone, you will start making choices of doing the easy things that you know how to do. You'll start making choices of not taking the big risky things because you don't know how to do those things. So the idea gets smaller and you'll only do incremental stuff at the end. But if you think of partners, and you believe that there are people outside who can help you get that competency to do what you have to do, then you can think bigger and you can think bolder. And also you get more confidence and you can go faster and cheaper with less risk. You don't have to make the mistakes that they already have learned not to do. And put that all together, and then you get what we would call the ability to work hard. So in summary on these things here, the 3 things I want to emphasize. You got to make strategic growth. And the way to make growth quantified is say, what is the gap? How much time do we have? What will we invest? If the gap is $1 billion and you've got 3 years to close the gap, I would assume it's reasonable to ask the company how much we're investing. And they say we are investing in 3 people to solve the problem, good luck. If they say we're going to invest $1 million, better to take the $1 million and go to casino in Las Vegas and put it on red or black. It's a $1 billion gap. It gives you a chance to understand what amount of investments we must make. Probably about $10 to $100 million is probably reasonable if you want to solve a $1 billion problem. The time creates urgency, and this creates a dialogue. Then you got to come up with ideas. And the idea is going to come up is ask what's next, what else, using trends. Those trends kind of give you a view of the future. In the future world, you start saying, which world do I like for my company? What are the solutions? What are the customers of the future? What's the technology of the future? And based on that, these are the best types of solutions which we're working on. If you do that, you have a plan. If you don't start on those things, you will not have a tree that you can harvest. So you have to then start working on them and start executing on them. And to start and execute on them, you got to act differently. You got to get started. And you have to recognize that as you get started, you must start with the right team, a team that doesn't give up, a team that pushes left and right, a team which is optimistic and collaborative, a team that you would say is the right team for me to take to Mount Everest. And that team then must feel urgency, pali, go fast, and always tell them, find partners to close the gap, find partners to go faster, find partners so that you don't have to make the mistakes others have already made. Find partners to get this thing done. And with that, that's my 3 advice to all of you guys. I'll give you a little bit about who IXL Center is and Jimmy. Jimmy is the Global Innovation Management Institute. We created certification for individuals, for training as well as standards. And we also got certification for organizations, Jimmy level 1, 2, 3, 4. We are global. Our history comes from Arthur D. Little and Monitor. And we also have been teaching this in business schools around the world. We have got technology platforms now that will allow you to see the future using AI, to see scenarios and visions, because we know it's not easy it's easy for me to say it, but now we've got tools with AI that can help you do those things, imagine the future, and also at the same time find partners anywhere at any time. It's an AI-powered engine called Akayo. And then just from the basis of this thing, we have also been working with ISO to create the global standards of innovation management. We were the leaders and the tag leader for the United States of America for the ISO 279. We write books on this topic, and we are basically driving the standards because we believe that if we can create and train 1 million people on innovation management techniques, then there will be no problem in the world that we cannot solve. And therefore, we want to unleash your creativity and your execution skills to be able to make innovation real. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was really, really great, Hitendra. When you were talking about the emerging growth gap, it made me think about the idea that Clayton Christensen has on disruptive innovation. And I mean, today we see that many organizations that are on top of their industries and markets fail to stay on top because new technologies are coming into the picture, and new players are coming in, and the market dynamics are changing. The industries are blurred, and so on and so forth. There are so many different factors that goes into that, which we'll not unpack. But so I want to combine this question with one from Kevin here. So what are some successful organizations you've worked with? What are they doing to maintain at the top? Once they have become, an innovation engine, what are they doing to staying there? And what capabilities are they building up? So what helps them to distinguish from others? And combining with Kevin here is also, he's talking about culture. So how does culture come into this picture as well?
So culture is often driven by the leaders, and how the leaders act becomes the values of organizations. And so if the leaders are talking about the fact that the world is changing and we need to adapt and we need to be flexible, and they repeatedly send a message, then the organization will pay attention to that. So one, it starts with the top. And if you know Jeff Bezos says it very nicely. He says, we are already a 25-year-old company. And most companies on the S&P 500 are supposed to start dying by the time they're 25 to 30 years old. The life expectancy of companies is increasingly getting shorter. So he says we got to act as if it's day one of our company, and we are acting like a startup and like entrepreneurs. And what does a startup and entrepreneur do? Well, you're thinking about the work when you take it home, ideas. You're bringing those ideas to the table from all parts of the world. You don't turn off completely when you go home. You are looking for what's next, what else. And there's a system for identifying those ideas and prioritizing those ideas. Right? So they have a committee at the leadership level, which says that what strategic choices are we making for the future? So they've got two things going on. They focus on how to win today. And they also say, what do we need to do for tomorrow? So a good CEO must deliver on the present and create a future. So it's the and that begins to appear in this conversation. And in this and, we must control our resources to be optimized. And we must partner with people because we don't have all the resources of the planet to be able to do everything. So we can't believe we have all the smart people. We don't have all the assets to do what we want to. So we got to think about partnering and building ecosystems. That's the second part of that. And the third part of this thing is here, unleashing this energy of people and telling them that if you have great ideas, we'll support it. We'll support it. Whether they have an internal accelerator, incubators, or they got a budget or a fund to fund those ideas. So lots of people have ideas, but they don't believe the companies will ever do anything about it. So you got to communicate a signal. We have a physical accelerator. We got a fund to do this kind of things. And then lastly, write stories. At Energizer, for example, all across the cafeteria on the walls, they got innovation idea 32. And there's a team standing there and what they did with that battery. Idea number 67, they're telling them what they did with this particular client on this channel. And they celebrate the successes of those heroes, not the heroes who just do the day-to-day work, but the heroes who create the future. There is no future without a present. There is no present without a future.
That's really great. That also makes me think about, the paradox that exists between short-term versus long-term view. So, driving, making sure that you're delivering on the quarterly basis and according to your expectations. Let's say if you're a project manager or if you're a VP or at any level below the CEO level, how do you convince the CEO that this is something that we should go for? Like, what tactics can you play with as an individual in the larger organization to have an influence on the senior leadership? So that's also, now we're shifting the tables, right? So instead of top down, bottom up view instead.
So we in the company looking up must recognize that we must deliver on the present. So there are present objectives and KPIs that you must do really well on. And if you're not doing well on that, then there's no point doing the future stuff either, right? So you got to do that first and do a good job on it. But you cannot tell your boss, we should do this future thing and ignore the present thing. So the first thing you have to make sure you also are thinking about the power of and. We deliver on the present and good results on that. And we should do this. But now when you talk about and we should do this, the leaders have two concerns. How much time will it take? How much resources will we have to put behind it? Time and money. So if you are clever, you would say, it won't take a lot of time and we don't have to put a lot of money. And they'll say, whoa, that's great. How can we do this for free in a short time? That's what they're looking for. That's the answer they're looking for. And you say, we can do this with partners, or we can do this with other resources inside the company, which is flexibly available. So you have to think about their dilemma. They don't want to spend money, and they don't want to put resources against a core business. So you got to find creative solution. And the creative solution in here is partnering and also getting customers who are interested in what you're trying to do. If you tell your boss, there's a customer who wants it, revenue. There's a partner who will help us build it, lower cost. And I and my own team will work on it. And I mean, you need to say something like this. We'll work on it on our time. We'll do this because we love this idea. Now the support increases, and then over time, you can ask for the money and everything else. But if you just go in there with your hat and say, I need money, I need time, I need a team, the boss will say, thank you very much, get out next. Right? Because that's the wrong approach. I mean, that's limited resources. So we have to be creative ourselves to make sure, and in your companies, all of you guys are listening, in your company, there's a guy, there's a woman in your company who always gets support. And watch what they say. They never ask for money, they don't ask for time, but somehow they get a yes on the project, and then they get the resources. Find out how they do it. They're doing it. Your companies are innovative. There are people in your company who figured it out. Make that the process.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really great. I mean, there's always blocks, maybe even politics within organizations that makes you not be able to progress the way you want. So we have another, I just wanted to take off another question from the audience. It comes from David Ross. Can you comment on the growth imperative in the context of sustainability, which has become valuable to younger talent we compete for? Does your organization's growth imperative exist within a sustainable aggregate, requiring an acceleration of failures too?
So there are two ways to link the growth imperative on climate change and sustainability and ESG and others. The first one is, we do know the top line revenue is being decided by customers. And customers, if they are making choices, whether you're green or you're supporting climate initiatives to slow it down, customers will choose you over somebody else. Then obviously it just is the right thing to do. So you can link it that our target customers are changing and they're demanding this. So that's just the business logic. No need to fight with that. That just makes sense. But there is also a component in here where you can go strategically as a leader. And though Carlos Ghosn is no longer as popular for whatever happened, but he took his company, Renault, and he basically says, look, we want to be the company that's going to have zero emissions. He says, we are the problem, and we need to solve the problem. And we will have zero emission cars in our whole portfolio by 2010 or 2020 or whatever the number is. And he sets a target for it. And he says, everybody do this. And why do they say that we should do this? Because they realize that if you do this challenging things, new science, new technology has to emerge that gives you some competitive advantage that your competition doesn't have. And therefore, the future car of Renault might be better, faster, quicker, or cheaper, right? So you take on these very hard challenges deliberately to drive your R&D and your innovation to come up with something which is unusual. I'll give you an example. A.G. Lafley at Procter & Gamble, at P&G. We were there with him in his conference room, and he has just come back from a meeting with Walmart. Walmart says, you guys are bringing too much cardboard, there's too much packaging, I need you to reduce everything by 20%. Because if you do that, there's less wastage on cardboard, less packaging material wastage, so everything should be less. But if your shampoo was giving me 20 washes of hair, the bottle needs to be 20% smaller, but still give me 20% of washes, the same efficacy. And he's all upset. He says, how the hell are we going to do this? This is crazy. And then he stops. He says, guys, we're going to do this though. And then we look at him like, you were furious at Walmart. Why did you say yes now? And he says, because if we do it and we can figure it out, we'll save the planet. We'll beat our competitor, Unilever. And consumers are going to say, wow, aren't we a better and nicer company? So growth imperative is completely linked to those kind of drives and stretches of driving science, or our consumers who will choose what they have to do. Our consumers are Gen Zs and millennials. My daughter, when she goes out with her friends for dinner, I take them out to a nice fish restaurant. They open up an app and they say, which fish can't they eat? On the menu, they say, no, we can't eat that one, we can't eat that one, we can't eat that one. I'm like, well, why not? They're dead. It's like, because of, and they have a value chain story on it. And they say, no, we can't do that. That's the consumer of the future. That restaurant had better change because I'm going to be dead, but my kid is still going to be alive and not going to that restaurant anymore.
So I will give you one more question, and then we can sort of round it off. The question comes from Patty Yahar Girdar. Certain industries prefer tried and tested products instead of breakthrough innovations. That doesn't mean the need for innovation is not there, but corporations in such industries prefer to acquire trees instead of planting seeds. How should we approach innovation in such circumstance?
I would say you can innovate. Let me first organize it differently. Within every industry, there's a pathfinder, a couple of pathfinders who actually go out and do something and they're not copying anybody. And then there's a whole bunch of companies behind it who copy them and replicate their products and services, right? So that's typically how it is. Even within your own industry, there are some companies who are driving this innovation. Now just learn from them and they replicate them. So those we call fast followers or rapid fast followers. Being a fast follower is not a bad thing. To be a fast follower, you need different capabilities to be able to innovate and be competitive. So let's take an example like when I used to be at Motorola. We copied nobody. We were the first in everything. But the day we launched our cell phones, immediately at Samsung, they would buy our phone and they would buy a phone from maybe Philips and a phone from maybe Siemens, and they would look at them and they'd benchmark them. And they would benchmark with the following criteria. What should we add that this guy's forgot? So what should we delete that is creating no value on the market? And what do we modify slightly that makes it feel better? And that was a strategy called add, modify, delete to existing competitive products. You can't just copy it. If you copy it, you just caught yourself in a catching up to the past. You have to improve it. Add, modify, delete was the strategy of this industry players to do that. So what did they have then? They had the ability to find out what was new very quickly. So they went to the supermarkets of the United States and Europe. They bought what was available. They did the benchmarking, very good at benchmarking and reverse engineering. That was a capability. And then they would ask add, modify, delete because they had very good insights to what customers really wanted. So they had great consumer insights. And they would link that together, and that was their capability. And then they knew how to find partners who could quickly put their product to the market as soon as possible so that you can now say, Motorola, you guys forgot to do A, B, and C, and we put it in there, and we did this, na. And that was their strategy. And they beat Motorola on the long run by that strategy. So you don't have to be first. You just need to make sure what do you want to do and build the competencies internally on innovation management to win.
Amazing. Now, before we go into the final notes here, Hitendra, is there anything else that you would like to address before we close?
Sure. Look, first, I think all of you are part of the PI community are disciplined and learners on how to be a better professional. I think complementing it with innovation techniques and tools will make you a much more successful leader. It is the embracing the end that there are things that we need to know how to do and we do it right and do it properly and execute effectively, efficiently every time. And then how do we change our head slightly to try and take this other stuff, which is not clear, is ambiguous, uncertain, to put it together. Each one of you should try and add this complementary skill sets together, and 1 + 1 will not be 2. 1 + 1 will be 11 for you. So try and put those things together, and I hope that you guys will fall in love with innovation. As you can tell, I love it. I enjoy this topic tremendously, and I've had a great life creating things. And when my kids ask me, "What did you do, Dad?" I tell them, "Look at the phone in your the phone or your laptop, and that battery in there. My team made that at Motorola, lithium-ion battery." And that's a story we should all be telling our grandkids. So I hope you guys are excited and start the journey of innovation as soon as possible. Thank you.
That's very inspiring. Thank you so much. So I really hope this session inspired you guys also in the audience here to continue to drive change and create value in your organization, hopefully impactful and sustainable value also. On that note, before we close, I just want to show you the latest book that we have called Driving Sustainable Innovation, How to Do Well While Doing Good. It was released in June, it's more of a compilation than a book. It consists of 25 thought-provoking articles discussing what organizations can do and how they can think about creating value with a sustainable mindset. So I urge you to take a look at this, and hopefully that will help you also to drive things beyond this webinar in your organization and your own context. Thank you so much, and have a great day ahead.